All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're diving deep into couples communication,
And, it's fascinating stuff. We have this handbook.
a couples therapy handbook.
Yeah. Designed for, actual therapy sessions packed with all sorts of worksheets and insight.
Worksheets, all right? That sounds practical.
Yeah,
In our mission, we're equipping you with some real-deal tools to strengthen your relationship. No fluff.
absolutely. And you know what really stood out to me? It's all about being proactive.
Oh. Tell me more.
It's not just about fixing problems. It's about building a strong foundation. Like, you wouldn't wait for your car to break down.
Before checking the oil.
Right, exactly. It's like preventative maintenance for your relationship.
So like a tune-up.
Yeah. And, they actually call it a relationship checkup.
Relationship checkup, got it.
And it doesn't have to be some big formal thing.
No therapist's office required.
Nope. It's just about taking time to assess your relationship regularly.
Regularly, okay. What does that look like?
Well, the handbook actually has this detailed questionnaire.
Okay, the questionnaire, all right.
Yeah, it helps you pinpoint specific areas, those areas that might need a little attention.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, everything from communication styles to conflict resolution.
Conflict resolution. Yeah, that one's big.
Oh, and intimacy, shared values, the whole 9 yards.
So much to unpack there. That questionnaire seems pretty helpful, though. But is there a risk of overthinking it? Getting too bogged down in the details?
That's a valid concern. The key, though, is to approach it with curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yeah, and openness, not judgment.
No pointing fingers.
Exactly. It's not about finding fault. It's about understanding.
Understanding.
Yeah.
So, once you've done this checkup,
Right.
what's next?
Well, the handbook dives into communication styles.
Communication styles. Always a hot topic.
It identifies 4 basic ones:
Okay, lay them on me.
passive-aggressive, passive-aggressive,
Go on.
and assertive.
All right.
Uh-huh.
But what does that look like in real life?
Okay, imagine you and your partner are deciding where to eat.
Dinner. Classic.
A passive communicator might just go along with whatever their partner wants.
Even if they secretly crave sushi,
Exactly.
guilty as charged. But wouldn't speaking up be aggressive?
Not necessarily. Aggressive is more like bulldozing your partner, insisting on getting your way, maybe even guilt-tripping.
Oof, yeah. No one wants that. So where's the healthy balance?
That's where assertive communication comes in.
Assertive. Tell me more.
An assertive communicator would express their preference clearly and respectfully. Like, hey, I know you're feeling Italian, but I'm really craving sushi tonight. Open to trying that.
Okay, I see the difference. Being direct but not demanding.
You got it. And you know what? Research actually shows that assertive communication is the most effective
The most effective. For what?
for reducing stress and boosting self-esteem.
That makes sense. You're standing up for yourself, but in a respectful way.
Exactly.
So how do we figure out our own style? Because I think we all use a mix, depending on the situation.
Well, the handbook, it has a self-assessment to help you with that.
Self-assessment. Interesting. What's that like?
It helps you identify your dominant style, so you can become more aware of those patterns.
Patterns, like how we communicate. Fascinating. And once you know your style, can you change it?
Absolutely. It takes effort, but you can shift towards a more assertive style.
So there's hope for us passive folks.
Definitely. And the handbook, it's packed with tips and exercises to help you develop that skill.
Okay, this is making me think about conflict. Because, let's be real.
It's inevitable in any relationship.
Right. But it's how you handle it.
You're absolutely right. And that's where this couples dialogue strategy comes in.
Couples dialogue. Sounds intriguing.
It's from the handbook. It breaks down conflict resolution into 3 key steps.
3 steps. Okay. I'm listening.
Mirroring, validation,
Mirroring validation.
and empathy.
Okay. Break those down for me. What do they actually look like in, real life?
Okay, let's say you're arguing about something simple, like the dishes.
The dishes. Classic.
The first step, mirroring, it's about reflecting back what your partner is saying, to make sure you're truly hearing them.
So, you're feeling frustrated because you feel like you're always the one stuck with the dishes.
Exactly. That's mirroring. It helps avoid misunderstandings and shows you're listening.
Right. Okay, then what?
Then comes validation, which doesn't mean agreeing, but acknowledging their feelings are valid.
Okay, so you might say something like, I get why you'd feel that way. It's not fun to feel like you're doing all the housework.
Perfect. You're validating their feelings without necessarily agreeing with their perspective.
And that leads into empathy, right? Trying
Yeah.
to really understand their experience.
Exactly. Putting yourself in their shoes. You might say, I can imagine how frustrating that would be. It's important to me that we share the load fairly.
This is making me realize that even small disagreements can escalate if we don't take the time to understand each other.
It's true. And you know what's fascinating? Sometimes our reactions are fueled by deeper fears.
Deeper fears. Like what?
Like fear of abandonment, fear of losing control, fear of not being good enough, all sorts of things.
Wow. So you're saying there are specific fears that can trigger intense reactions?
Researchers have identified 5 core fears.
5. Okay, give me the rundown.
Okay, so I've got extinction, mutilation,
Extinction, mutilation. Okay, keep going.
loss of autonomy, separation,
Wow, these are heavy.
and death of self.
Death of self. That one sounds intense. What does that even mean in a relationship?
It's the fear of losing your identity, that feeling of your self-worth crumbling.
I think I've felt that before. So how does this handbook help us deal with these fears? Because recognizing them is one thing, but what do we do next?
Well, it offers strategies.
Strategies for managing these fears.
Yeah. Both individually and as a couple. Understanding where they come from, how they manifest, how to create that sense of safety.
Safety and security.
Yeah.
Makes sense. This is making me think about how outside stress can totally impact our communication.
Absolutely. The handbook emphasizes that stress can be a big factor.
Work deadlines, family stuff, even just the news.
Yeah, all of that. It can make us more reactive, less patient, less empathetic.
So we're basically primed for miscommunication when we're stressed.
It can definitely make things more challenging. But recognizing that connection is a huge step. And the handbook has tips for managing stress, setting boundaries, creating a more supportive dynamic.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. There are things we can do. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Relationship checkups, communication styles, conflict resolution, even those deep-seated fears. Where do we go from here?
Well, next up, we're going to talk about intimacy.
Intimacy.
I know. You're probably thinking.
That we're finally getting to the good stuff.
Well, it is good stuff.
Uh,
But intimacy, it goes beyond just the physical aspect.
okay, tell me more.
It's about emotional, physical, and intellectual connection.
Like that deep sense of knowing and being known by your partner.
Yes, exactly.
But how do you actually build that? You can't just snap your fingers and suddenly feel deeply connected, right?
You're right. It takes effort and intention. And the handbook suggests starting with verbal communication.
Verbal communication.
Meaning making time for real conversations, not just logistical stuff, but heart-to-hearts. Sharing your feelings, dreams, even those silly little things that made you laugh.
I love that.
Yeah.
But let's be honest. It's so easy to let those conversations slip away. With work and life and everything. How do you make time for that?
Well, the handbook emphasizes that even just 15 minutes can make a difference.
15 minutes. Okay, that's manageable.
Yeah. Maybe after dinner, before bed, just to check in with each other. It's about consistency.
Consistency, I like it. What about physical affection? Where does that fit in?
Oh, that's definitely part of the equation. The handbook suggests exploring different types of touch.
Cuddling, hand-holding, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And figuring out what resonates with both of you, what makes you feel loved and connected.
So it's not just about the amount of affection. It's about the quality and the intention behind it.
Exactly. And this brings up another interesting point. How do you maintain your individuality within a couple? It's easy to lose yourself in a relationship.
Oh, I know that feeling. You want to spend every moment together, share all the same hobbies, but then you might start to feel like you're losing a piece of yourself.
And that can lead to resentment, frustration. The handbook suggests finding a balance.
A balance between what?
Between pursuing your own interests and goals and staying connected as a couple.
So it's like finding that sweet spot between being a we and still honoring the me within the relationship.
Yeah. Exactly. And the handbook even talks about supporting each other's growth.
Yeah.
Celebrating achievements, offering encouragement, being each other's biggest cheerleader.
Because when you're both thriving individually, it strengthens the relationship as a whole.
Precisely.
This is really making me rethink how I approach communication in my own relationship. It's not just about talking, it's about so much more.
It really is.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to unpack here.
Oh, there's plenty more where that came from.
I can't wait to dive into more of these insights with you.
Me too.
We'll be back with more juicy stuff in the next part of your deep dive.
Stay tuned. Welcome back. As we dig deeper into this handbook, I'm noticing some common communication pitfalls.
Pitfalls? Like what?
Well, one that really jumped out at me is faulty assumptions.
Faulty assumptions. I think we've all been there.
Right, like expecting your partner to read your mind.
Oh, yeah. That never ends well. But isn't that part of being close? Like, shouldn't you just get each other?
It would be nice, but the handbook points out even the closest couples, they can't read minds.
True. So these assumptions, where do they come from?
It's often from past experiences,
Yeah.
things we've learned from our families, the media, even friends.
They bring all this baggage into our relationship.
We do, and sometimes we project those expectations onto our partners without even realizing it.
So we're setting ourselves up for failure.
It can definitely create unnecessary friction. The key is to become aware of those assumptions.
Okay. So how do we do that?
Well, start by asking yourself, is this expectation realistic? Is it based on facts or just my own insecurities?
That's a good point. Check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Exactly. And most importantly, talk to your partner. Don't expect them to guess what you're thinking.
Communication is key. Don't assume. Ask.
I like that. Speaking of communication, the handbook also talks about self-respect.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah. And it might seem a bit off topic, but I can see how it's connected.
It's huge. Because if you don't respect yourself, how can you expect your partner to?
That's a good point.
The handbook really emphasizes that self-respect. It's the foundation for healthy communication. And boundaries.
So it's about knowing your worth and not being afraid to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about valuing your feelings, asking for what you need, expressing yourself authentically.
Okay, but what about those times when we just want to avoid conflict? Is that always a bad thing? Well, that brings us to another pitfall. The fear of confrontation.
Yes. The dreaded confrontation.
The handbook says a lot of people, especially those who've had tough relationships in the past, will do anything to avoid it.
Avoid confrontation. I've totally been there. Sometimes it just feels easier to let things go than to rock the boat.
I get it. But we all know where that leads. Resentment, anger, and eventually a big blow up.
Not good.
Yeah.
So how do we find that balance between, speaking up and avoiding conflict altogether?
Well, that's where assertive communication comes in again.
Assertive communication.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot between being passive and aggressive, expressing yourself honestly, directly, but still respectfully.
Like Goldilocks. Not too hot, not too cold, just right.
Exactly. And the handbook has a bunch of tips for communicating assertively.
Oh, like what?
Using I statements, setting clear boundaries, and practicing active listening. All really helpful tools.
I'm curious. Does the handbook address any situations that might be, beyond communication issues? Like, what about dealing with verbal abuse?
It does touch on that, which, as you said, is often brushed aside.
Right. It's more common than people think.
Hmm.
And it can really damage a relationship.
Absolutely. And it's not always obvious,
Hmm.
especially when it's disguised as just joking or, being passionate. It's like, where's the line?
Exactly. So what guidance does a handbook offer?
Well, it helps you recognize the signs, setting boundaries, seeking help when needed. It reminds us that respect is fundamental to any healthy relationship.
That's so important.
Mm.
And I see it also talks about supportive communication, which is basically the opposite of all that negativity.
Right. Instead of criticism and judgment, it's about recognizing and appreciating your partner's strengths.
Building them up instead of tearing them down.
Exactly. And the handbook really emphasizes, acknowledging and appreciating the little things. Words of encouragement, expressing gratitude, even just listening attentively.
It's those little things that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that idea of maintaining individuality. We touched on it earlier, but I want to explore it more. It's about finding that balance between being a we and still honoring the me, right?
You got it. The handbook, it stresses that losing yourself in a relationship, it can lead to all sorts of problems. Resentment, anxiety, even a feeling of emptiness.
So it's not about being completely independent. It's about having your own space to grow.
Yeah. And remember our conversation about assertive communication. That's super important here, too.
Because you need to be able to communicate your needs and set boundaries.
Right. Exactly. Think about it this way. If you're both constantly drawing from the same well, eventually it's going to run dry.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So you're saying we each need our own wellspring.
Yeah. Your own wellspring of passions, experiences, you bring that richness back into the relationship.
And share it with each other.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. So practically speaking, how do we do this? How do we maintain our individuality?
Well, the handbook suggests some pretty simple things. Schedule time for yourself, reconnect with friends, pursue those hobbies.
And encourage your partner to do the same.
Exactly. It's about mutual support and respect.
This is really shifting my perspective. You're not two halves trying to make a whole. You're two whole people choosing to share their lives.
Beautifully said. And that brings us to another important point the handbook makes, listening.
Listening.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems obvious, but
It's more than just hearing words. It's an art form. It takes practice and intention.
I have to admit, I'm not always the best listener. It's easy to get distracted or start thinking about what I'm going to say next. Any tips for being more present?
Oh, we've all been there. The handbook really stresses active listening. It's about putting aside your own thoughts and judgments and focusing on what your partner is saying.
So not just the words, but their tone, their body language, everything. That's a lot to take in.
It is. But the handbook has some great techniques. Maintaining eye contact, asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what you've heard.
Oh, like what I'm hearing you say is.
Exactly. It helps avoid misunderstandings.
Speaking of understanding each other, the handbook also talks about managing expectations.
Oh yeah, expectations. They can be tricky.
I think we've all experienced the frustration of having our expectations, clash with reality.
It happens. The handbook emphasizes recognizing those unrealistic expectations and challenging them.
So, like, asking yourself, is this expectation based on my partner's actions? Or am I just projecting my own desires?
Exactly. It's about having a realistic view of your partner.
Flaws and all. We can't expect them to be perfect.
Right. Your partner is their own person with their own thoughts and feelings, and that's okay.
It doesn't mean they love you any less.
Not at all. It just means they're human.
That's a good reminder. So instead of placing all these expectations on our partners, what should we be doing?
The handbook suggests focusing on communication and compromise, talking about your expectations openly, listening to each other, finding ways to meet those needs in a balanced way.
It's about finding that middle ground where you both feel heard, respected, and loved for who you are.
Exactly. And this brings us to another important but often difficult topic, forgiveness.
Forgiveness. Ugh, that one's tough.
I know, it's so easy to hold on to anger and resentment, especially when you've been hurt.
It is. So how does the handbook approach forgiveness?
Well, it emphasizes that forgiveness isn't about condoning the behavior or letting your partner off the hook.
So then what is it about?
It's about releasing yourself from that burden of anger.
Letting go.
Yeah. So you can move forward, choosing to focus on the future.
That's a powerful way to think about it. It's not about them, it's about you.
Yeah.
And your own well-being.
You got it. And the handbook, it gives some practical steps for practicing forgiveness.
Like what?
Well, it starts with acknowledging your feelings, setting boundaries, communicating your needs to your partner.
It sounds like a journey, not a destination.
It is. And remember, forgiveness, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. And that's okay.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I'm really starting to understand how much work goes into a healthy relationship.
Me too.
And we're not even done yet. There's still more to explore.
Oh, yeah. We've got one more part to this deep dive. We'll dive into even more practical tips and insights.
Yeah, wait. I'm ready for more.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back. We've talked a lot about the importance of talking, of verbal communication.
Absolutely.
But this handbook, it emphasizes that words are only one part of it.
It's true. There's so much more to communication than just the words we say.
Okay, so what else is there? What are we missing?
Well, the handbook actually has a whole section on nonverbal communication.
Nonverbal communication. Okay, so we're talking body language.
Exactly. It's amazing how much we communicate without even saying a word.
I know. Sometimes you can just tell how someone's feeling by their facial expressions or how they're standing.
Right. Like crossed arms can often signal defensiveness,
Uh-huh.
while leaning forward, might show interest or engagement.
It's like our bodies are speaking their own language.
They are. And becoming more aware of those cues, those nonverbal signals, it can really give you a deeper understanding of your partner, what they're really feeling.
That makes sense. But can body language be misleading? What if someone's just naturally shy? It doesn't necessarily mean they're not into you, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. The handbook stresses the importance of context and your partner's personality. It's not about jumping to conclusions, but about paying attention to all those cues, both verbal and nonverbal.
So it's like piecing together a puzzle. You need all the pieces to get the full picture.
Exactly. And if you're ever unsure, the best approach is just to ask.
Just ask, okay? Like, hey, I'm sensing some hesitation here. Is there something you want to talk about?
Perfect. Open communication is key. Always.
Speaking of open communication, I'm guilty of this sometimes, but I get so caught up in my own world that I forget to, check in with my partner.
I think we've all been there. It's easy to get distracted, right? But the handbook really emphasizes the importance of those regular check-ins.
Check-in, okay.
Yeah, just asking open-ended questions to invite your partner to share.
Like, how's your day? Or what's on your mind? That kind of thing.
Exactly, simple questions, but they can really show your partner that you care, that you're there for them.
It's like a reminder to stay curious about your partner, even if you've been together for years.
People change and grow, relationships evolve, and keeping that communication flowing is essential.
So let's touch on intimacy again. This handbook really highlights its importance, but it also acknowledges that it's something many couples struggle with, especially as time goes on.
It's true, maintaining intimacy takes effort, but it's so worth it.
But how do you cultivate that deep connection,
Sure.
especially when, the honeymoon phase is over?
Well, the handbook suggests focusing on those small, everyday gestures, the ones that show love and care and affection.
Okay, like what kinds of things?
Expressing appreciation, offering words of encouragement, even just making eye contact and really listening when your partner is speaking.
It's the little things that count.
They really do. Those small actions can speak volumes.
And what about physical intimacy?
The handbook encourages couples to explore different types of touch.
Like cuddling, holding hands, that kind of thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's about finding those gestures that make both of you feel loved and connected.
It all comes back to understanding each other's needs,
Right.
both your own and your partner's.
It does. And that brings us back to, maintaining separate interests and identities.
Right, giving each other space.
Which might seem counterintuitive, but it can actually make the connections stronger.
I get it. It prevents you from becoming too dependent on each other. And you bring new experiences into the relationship. Keep things fresh.
Exactly. It's like that saying, distance makes the heart grow fonder. Having your own space, your own passions, it can really enrich the relationship.
Wow. This whole deep dive has been so insightful. I'm realizing that communication is so much more than just talking.
It's a complex dance.
It is. It's about listening, understanding, being willing to put in the effort to truly connect.
You said it. And remember, relationships take work, even the strongest ones. But it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up here, what's the one thing you hope listeners will take away from this deep dive?
If I had to sum it up, effective communication is the key. It's the foundation for a healthy, happy relationship. And the best part, it's a skill, something you can learn and practice.
That's a great point. It's not some magical thing, it's something we can all work on. Well, we've covered so much ground today, from communication styles to conflict resolution, intimacy, even forgiveness.
We have.
And I hope our listeners feel equipped with some new tools and insights to strengthen their own relationships.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into couples communication. Until next time.